we're not enough. And the good news of the book is that that's not just okay, it's really good news, because Christ is our sufficiency. If we were enough for our salvation, for our sanctification, for our strength, we would not need Christ. But we needed him so much that he actually died on the cross, a brutal death that he did not deserve, because we're insufficient. Our sufficiency in all things, salvation and otherwise, comes from Christ. And trying to find our sufficiency in ourselves or elsewhere is just going to exhaust us.
Allie, you've written a book called You're Not Enough, and That's Okay, Escaping the Toxic Culture of Self-Love. And then in the very beginning of the book, you talk about your own struggle with this issue of self-love. Can you just recount that journey for us?
So I decided to write this book, I think it was in 2018, because I just noticed that a lot of my fellow women, and especially fellow Christian women, were talking a lot about self-love, self-care, self-empowerment. And it was just strange that I was hearing this from Christian women, and Christians are supposed to die to self. And actually scripture said that in the end days, people will be lovers of self, and they don't say that in a good way. And so I kind of thought that this was strange. But then when I realized, I was kind of looking back at my own journey in life, I realized that I had kind of struggled with this idea too, of wanting to be the solution to my problems, wanting to be enough for myself, trying to prove that I am self-sufficient, that I didn't need God, that I didn't need his rules. And I think that's what a lot of women are doing today when they're latching on to kind of the self-love movement. So for me, it started in college, and I was raised a Christian in a Christian home, and I really did take my faith seriously end of high school, beginning of college. And then a few things happened, which I talk about in the book, that kind of sent me into this spiral of trying to figure out who I was, what my purpose was. I had kind of a crisis of faith my senior year of high school. I started drinking too much. I had bad relationships. I ended up having an eating disorder, and it was all really trying to find acceptance and wanting to be loved and wanting to be wanted and really wanting to be enough, and trying to prove that I didn't need the boyfriend that I had. I didn't need God. I didn't need anyone. I could be fulfilled and have fun and be independent without needing anyone else, and certainly without needing any standards or rules. And that obviously put me at a dead end. Now, thankfully, providentially, as I talk about in the book, there was a Christian counselor who, rather than just, coddling me and telling me a lot of the things that unfortunately women hear today, she just said, look, you are killing yourself through this eating disorder and through this destructive behavior. And if you want to die when you're 22 or 23, keep it up, basically. And I didn't want that. Really, the image of that happening, the idea of that happening, and kind of coming to terms with the fact that I was addicted to a lifestyle that was sinful, but that also wasn't good for me, and that I could really hurt the people around me. It really kind of stopped me in my tracks. And then I had let sin get so far, and I had let things snowball so much, even though I knew better. And it really just filled me with a lot of shame. And I know that shame is typically used today in a completely negative sense. We're told that we're not supposed to feel ashamed of anything, but I actually think that we are supposed to feel ashamed of sin. I think we're supposed to feel really sad and really grieved over sin. And it took a Christian counselor telling me a really hard truth, and telling me what my destructive behavior was doing to kind of, awaken that shame in me. And I really think the Lord for that shame. Like, I thank the Lord for feeling so guilty and so bad and so sad over just how far I had gone, and his faithfulness to me and sharing that hard truth with me and bringing me back. And what I realized in all of that, of course, later, as I'm thinking through these messages that we see on social media, that you are enough, you're good enough the way you are, you're perfect the way you are, all of these things, is that I had actually bought into those lies. And so I talked to a lot of different women as I was writing this book. Like, have you struggled with these lies? There was one woman that I talk about in the book. She was a mother, and she had 2 babies right in a row. And, for moms who are in that newborn stage, you're in the thick of it. It is so hard. And gosh, if you ever know that you're not enough, it's kind of in those days when you're so tired and your energy is just zapped. But she said that she was turning to these Facebook groups that were telling her that, all she needs to do is focus on herself. All she needs to do is, more self-care and more self-focus, and really kind of talked about her kids as they were burdens. And she really turned to this stuff to try to make herself feel better. long story short, that didn't work. She actually ended up being almost suicidal. And it wasn't until, again, she kind of had this reckoning with her husband and telling him, how she's struggling and all of that, that she realized that actually the journey to trying to be enough, to try to be enough for yourself, for your kids, or your husband, that actually depletes you. It actually exhausts you. We're not enough. And the good news of the book is that that's not just okay. It's really good news because Christ is our sufficiency. If we were enough for our salvation, for our sanctification, for our strength, we would not need Christ. But we needed him so much that he actually died on the cross, a brutal death that he did not deserve because we're insufficient. Our sufficiency in all things, salvation and otherwise, comes from Christ. And trying to find our sufficiency in ourselves or elsewhere, it's just going to exhaust us.
So how do we balance self-care with not being too self-focused? Because we're stewards of this body, this life. How do we balance those?
Yeah, you said it exactly right, that we are stewards of this life and we are stewards of this body. And we see in the creation of the Sabbath that obviously we are meant to rest, that God knows that we are meant to rest. He made our bodies to actually need sleep. He made our bodies to need leisure. We also know that he has given us so many gifts of common grace, meaning that people of all different backgrounds can enjoy them. That means, good food, sex, sleep, vacation, all of these things that he has given us that we certainly have the privilege of being able to enjoy. And so we can embrace those things, knowing that God has created us for that balance. But also, I think that it is a matter of your mentality and also your heart. Like you used the word stewardship. The idea of stewardship that, okay, I need to rest, I need to rejuvenate, I need to take a step back, I need to enjoy these good blessings in my life that God has given me just for the sake of enjoyment. That I am stewarding my time well, that I'm stewarding my body well, that I'm stewarding my work well. That is very different than an attitude of entitlement. That if I don't get my, Saturday night with my girls, then that means that I am basically oppressed by my schedule, that my kids are a burden, and that I am not getting everything that I deserve. When we think of God as our shepherd and God as our caretaker, and God is the one who takes care of us, and we see the different opportunities for rest as really gifts from him, while also knowing that if we don't get the breaks that we think that we need, because we know as parents, they just don't always come, that he's going to be our sustaining strength. I think that's a different mentality than what we see from kind of the secular self-love, self-care culture, which is that you are entitled to a certain amount and a certain kind of basically just like self-serving time, when that's not necessarily true. We're not necessarily entitled to that. And at different stages of life with different responsibilities that we have, rest looks different. And we have to be okay with that and be grateful for the opportunities of rest and leisure that God gives us.
In your book, you also dispel a couple of other notions like you're entitled to your dreams and you can't love others until you love yourself. Would you just grab one of those and explain to us why that's not a good idea?
Yeah, so I'll do the last one. You can't love other people until you love yourself, because I hear it so often because people misunderstand. This is the most misused when Jesus says, when we're told to love our neighbor as ourselves, we're told that that's us. Some people say that's also a directive to love ourselves, but that's not actually what Jesus is saying. He is saying loving yourself is really a given, that we are born loving ourselves. And I know people push back on that, but what I mean by that isn't that we think that we're pretty, or isn't that we like ourselves all the time, or that we feel affection towards ourselves. What I think Jesus means, and what it means to have an innate love of yourself, means that you are always seeking your own well-being, your own safety, your own security, to meet your own needs, to satisfy your hunger and your thirst. We are born with instincts to do these things. This is how we love ourselves. We're always thinking about ourselves and our best interests. If we're honest, we all are. Whether we struggle with self-loathing or self-praise, we're always really thinking about ourselves and how to, again, preserve and perpetuate our own interests. So it seems that what Jesus is saying is that just as you are so naturally driven to love yourself and take care of yourself in these ways, you need to love your neighbor in the same way. Because we know that he couldn't be talking about feeling affection for your neighbor. He couldn't be talking about just liking your neighbor. He couldn't be talking about any kind of feelings towards your neighbor. That's not what we see modeled in Scripture. regardless of feelings, we're to take care of our neighbor. We're to meet our neighbor's need, regardless of the affection we may or may not feel towards them. The love that we are called to have towards them is that of action. And so it would make sense if the parallel is also the love of ourselves that is manifested in just things that we naturally do for ourselves. And so this idea that you can't love other people until you feel a certain way for yourself, it's just not true. It's just not biblical. And we would be waiting around for a really long time because all of us are going to struggle with insecurities. And the people who actually need our love and need our care can't wait for us to, feel great about our body image or something like that.